Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and the bins that you see here in the corner, they're the bins that I plan on checking in on today. It's been 10 days since our last check-in and feeding. The systems are now at the age of 21 weeks. That's 147 days. And 10 days ago, the food that they got was some stewed veggies, some coffee, and some potato peels that had growth coming out of them. Oftentimes I'll freeze the potato peels just to make sure they don't begin growing, but in this case the potato peel was raw and already showed little signs of growth. So we already sort of predicted that by the time we come back in here next time, we'd probably see some growth, and I'm fairly sure that's what I'm seeing here. I think I'm starting to see the plastic start to pop up, and I think we're, oh boy, I don't know. We're going to have to get these up on the bench to get a better look at what's really happening here. So it's not a big deal, but still, it's just something that I try to prevent by freezing the foods that I put into the worm bin so they don't start sprouting. But in this case, we didn't, and that's to be expected, what you see right there. So I'm going to put on a glove. We're going to get up on the bench and get these guys fed. So let's get to work. So I don't know if the potato peel fed to both of these systems was growing, but I know it was definitely growing in at least one of the containers. So now this is pretty interesting. We were trying to give this top covering pieces of, it's not even what, maybe it was a single piece of newspaper once in the past. But it had just really become little fragments, which we figured, you know what, it's made it this far, let's return it. And we just kind of scattered those pieces of remaining paper out around this feeding zone indicator, and it seems like they've come up for that stuff and nibbled away the better portion of it. And that's fine, because I've got a couple new pieces of paper here that I thought we'd use as replacement top coverings, which I think the worms appreciate. You know, the plastic we took off causes the recirculation of the moisture that's within the system, and then the worms really like to come up to the surface for that recirculating moisture. And when you put out like a top covering piece of newspaper or something along those lines, it gets nice and damp. I bet little puddles form, little droplets at least. And then the worms really come up for that, and while they're up here, they seem to really also enjoy nibbling on these little scraps of paper. So I thought that we'd collect up any remaining pieces of this paper and just use it as bedding down in the feeding zone. There's certainly not a whole lot of it. I've got also a piece of napkin here. So this, and well, I don't know. There's going to be the replacement top covering, and this was really just the extent of the bedding that I was planning to use today. I was a little bit stingy with bedding in the past few check-ins. I don't think we gave them bedding last time either. But I do remember actually making a comment during the last check-in about how much residual bedding we found down within the feeding area as we tilled it up to see how things were progressing. So I did just shoot outside to replenish my supply of leaves. I've got a box of leaves, but you know, I don't even know where I put it. Maybe I left it upstairs. Oh, brother. Well, I don't know. Perhaps it's not that important that we add more bedding today, although we could always just tap into my supply of shredded paper and cardboard bedding. But I guess we'll decide when we get this feeding zone excavated. Some of the things that we're going to bump into are foods that take quite a long time to break down in a worm bin, like these chunks of corn cob. That's what all these are. And then these things are some of the potato bits. And when you put raw potato bits into a worm bin, it just seems like it's going to take a long time to break down, especially if it's going to start growing. Although we didn't see any signs of that happening here. I got a feeling when we get into the other bin, we're going to see evidence of growth. I think we already saw signs of it with the plastic being sort of popped up over there. So I don't know, I just usually do this when I go to feed my systems. I try to inspect how things are coming along since the last feeding. Sometimes I'll review the video like I did last night, just in preparation for coming in to check on this bin today. Oh yeah, this is part of a larger pumpkin stem, and the other part that's in the other system, I accidentally cracked it into little pieces last week. I remember I was a little bit disappointed in myself, because usually I like to just leave the pumpkin stems when I feed them to my worm bins as a whole object, and really allow for just the worm composting activity to eventually whittle it down to nothing. So I try not to help with the breakdown process, and you know, when you shatter something into multiple pieces, you're definitely helping a lot with the breakdown process. So in that other bin, we definitely gave the pumpkin stem a little advantage to help get it to the finish line. Here's the stem of a banana. A little bit of the banana peel even still stuck to it. So we got some leftovers here. The leftover, I think the leftover potato was very much expected. But the stewed veggies that were put in here last time, I didn't really expect to see much of that, if any. And I don't think I've seen any so far. Here's another banana stem. You know, you figure a nice big piece of vegetable that was cooked and really soft and came out of a stew is something that the worms are going to be able to chew up very easily, as opposed to like a piece of potato, which is even still kind of crunchy. I don't know if you heard it when I snapped it, but it's still got kind of a crunchy stiffness to it. So I think it's going to take some time for that potato to break down. So we'll be bumping into that repeatedly as we come back in here to feed in the future check-ins. So I don't know. I guess the sort of leftovers we found are the sort of things you do expect to find as leftovers. When it comes to banana peels, the stems do take a little bit longer. The peels themselves go pretty quick. Although last time I think they were leftovers already. And even last time they were starting to show some nice signs of wear. And at this point, the fact that we're only really finding the stems anymore is pretty much normal. So I think we've created a pretty good size opening down here to put today's feeding into. And like I said before, we've got some collected paper and top coating, or you know, top surface materials that we sort of scraped together, but it sure ain't much. And then there's this soiled piece of paper towel here. I almost feel like grabbing a handful of my my prepared shredded cardboard and paper and leaf mixture to just enhance this a little bit with a little bit of extra bedding. So let's grab my collection of prepared bedding. This stuff is really damp. Sometimes this stuff is a bit dry, sometimes it's pretty damp. This time it's pretty damp. And I think that's probably going to be beneficial, because I also remember when we checked in on this particular system last time, we did note how one of the edges was a little bit dry. And besides that, the stuff that they're getting today is not going to bring with it a whole lot of moisture. So like one of the things that they're getting today is a banana peel, which was in the freezer, but it's been thawing, so it's softened up pretty good. And then I've also got a bunch of dry, moldy bread. And, oh, look at that piece right there. Look at that mold. Yeah. I had kept this stuff in the freezer just so the mold would kind of stop growing. I mean, I felt like what was on here already was plenty. I guess my preference was to not allow the mold just to end up eating all the bread. So let's see, I think we've taken more or less half of it. and placed it in here. Now we've got some leftovers we collected along the way too. Let's get them back down into service. And yeah, potato. None of this is growing though. I got a feeling when we get to the next system though, we're going to find that at least that one piece that I remember distinctly had all kinds of little growth already popping out on it. That piece is definitely growing actively. So, oh yeah, I remember when I watched the video from our last check-in, I had the grit that I sometimes apply to my worm bins on the side, and I only noticed it at the end of the video how I had put it on the side and planned to give it to the worms, but forgot. So this time we'll remember to give it to them. And the stuff that I'm sprinkling in here is it's worm chow, which is it's a mixture of different pulverized stuff like bird seed, some sort of nuts maybe sometimes. I think I put some neem seed meal in there, and maybe some oatmeal. I don't remember. It's always a variety of different things that go into my worm chow. So I believe it was this side that I had noted as being possibly a little bit drier than it needed to be. But then as a result of that, we did return the plastic covering as thoroughly as we could to make sure we're not losing excess moisture to evaporation. And it seems like it probably did the trick. Unless I'm misremembering, unless it was actually the other side that was the dry side. But if it was this side that was the one that was appearing to be a little bit dry, it certainly doesn't seem that way now. Let's check out how, what's this? Okay. Here we go. Look at this thing. Potato growing like crazy. Okay, interesting. We almost missed it. But I do like to sort of inspect almost like the entire system if possible when I'm checking into feed. So it's not surprising that we would eventually stumble on something that's in here. It's kind of tough for things to evade me because I do like to usually put the feeding in, but also check sections of the bin that are not getting fed just to make sure that they're in good shape. Here too, look at all the worms. Very nice. Moisture's healthy. You know, with all that dry bread going in and those pieces of paper, those dry pieces of paper we threw in, I worried a little bit that maybe we would have to add moisture to this system because I knew that between the banana peels and the bread and the paper that we added, that it wouldn't really be getting any moisture from the foods. It was also part of the reason I wanted to include some of my prepared bedding, which I knew was quite sopping wet, to make sure I compensate for the dry stuff that we were putting in. But I'm really happy to see how things are looking quite nice in here. This is kind of cool too, how the worms have really kind of made themselves at home on this little piece of potato that's trying to grow here. I mean, I thought that I'd try to like chip away at it and break it up and maybe try to remove some of these roots and see what I could do about trying to stifle the growth of this thing. But I'm concerned about injuring the poor little wormies. So maybe we'll just leave it and it'll just continue growing. Wow, look at that thing. The worms are just all over this thing. I always thought that worms are more interested in something that's sort of decomposing, not something that's actively growing. So, whatever. I think we've indulged our curiosity on the potato, and we've got more to see in the next bin, I'm sure, because I could see the plastic popping up. So let's get this system here covered up and back in service, put it back up on the shelf so they can continue their excellent work in this bin. These African nightcrawlers are doing quite a nice job in here, I must say. And, oh yeah, here's the replacement piece of paper, or top covering paper. This is the little bag in which we had some of that dry bread. And I figured it was big enough. It was like a large bag that I figured if I cut in half, we'd have enough to replace the top covering paper in both systems. So I've got another one of those for the other bin as well. So I guess the trick here was just to make sure we're thorough in covering up the system as best we can to limit evaporation, although I've really got to admit that there's really no signs of anything in here that really concerns me as far as moisture goes now, which is pretty awesome. So let's get the other system out here and get them fed too. Here we go. Now this is the one where we saw like a little tent happening here. Oh, and we don't even get to see it quite yet. So we've still got our feeding zone indicator covering up the action. Oh, here we go. You can already see part of it right there. Oh, wow. Yeah, this potato really took off, it seems. But I think we're just going to sort of put an end to that and transform anything that's started growing here and turn it into worm food. Although it seems like the worms are not bashful about just diving right into this thing. I don't know. Perhaps just the little chit and the shoots are growing, but perhaps other parts of it are already deteriorating and becoming something that the worms can actually take advantage of. I don't know. Alright, so here's some leftovers of the top covering. Maybe it was in this one that we had sort of taken little fragments, and maybe the other one was still sort of a whole piece of paper. I can't remember. But in one of them, the top covering paper was still kind of intact, and on the other one, it was just little fragments of paper that were sort of just replaced around the feeding zone indicator. All right, so let's see what other sort of stuff is growing under here. I mean, we saw little shoots popping out in multiple places. Here again, I mean, they're both managed very similarly, these two bins, so we're going to see similar leftovers like we saw in the other one, like these corn cobs. And like I said before, there was a stem of a pumpkin in here too, one that I shattered into little pieces last time by accident, so chances are we'll find those pieces because I put them back in sort of right next to each other. But at this point, I'm assuming that they're going to start breaking down a lot more rapidly than if it was still a whole solid piece of pumpkin stem. All these roots. I don't know if I'm doing enough to really stifle the growth of this stuff. I got a feeling if we put it back into the feeding area, it's just going to continue growing. But who knows? Maybe we just damaged it enough to stop the growth. Here's more. Similar leftovers like what we saw in the other bin. More banana stems. These things are really gooey, really damp on the inside. I think that's the reason the worms like to burrow down into the inside of these things. Yep, here we go. More potato peel. Yeah, you can hear it when I snap it, how crunchy it is still. Here's another sliver of potato peel. Let's see about excavating this feeding zone a little bit more wholesale. Just grab a whole big chunk of it and let's really get down to seeing how many leftovers we've got in here. It does seem like it's starting to pile up. More chunks of corn cob and this. Yep, more corn cob. There's a good bit of it in here. Once in a while I'll take the corn cob, a piece of corn cob, and just snap it in half just to see what the inside of it looks like. But the corn cob, same as the pumpkin stem, same as everything for the most part. I just like to leave things to their own devices so they can just really break down at their own pace within the bin, and that we can observe it over time to see how it goes on its own without much help. And I guess it was just the potato peels, which I figured those were the sort of things I really felt like we should try to help them turn more into worm food, into something that's going to start breaking down rather than something that's going to continue to grow. Here we go. Here's a chunk of the pumpkin stem. So this is just one little piece of it. I think I shattered it into something like 3 equal pieces. And look at that. Look at the size of that piece of banana peel and how well it's holding up. It's pretty interesting. For some reason, I did get this feeling just based on watching the video last time that this system might actually have more worms living in it than the first system that we checked. But for whatever reason, it seems like we're bumping into some pretty good sized leftovers in here. Look at that. Another pretty good sized piece of banana peel, which was not put in here fresh last time. This was already leftovers last time. Interesting. Kind of makes me wonder why something would be sticking around that long. Here's another piece of the pumpkin stem. You can see it was a pretty good piece, right? Here's one portion of it. This piece might have been something like this in here, I believe. And I believe there might have even been a third fragment that came off of that when it shattered in my hand. I was just sort of squeezing it, checking out how it was starting to become a little bit mushy and soft, and then snap, it broke into 3 pieces. At least that's what I remember. So I think we've pretty much unearthed every piece of leftover that was in here. Look at this, even more banana peels. Man, kind of unusual to find so many leftovers in here. I really thought that they'd be doing away with this stuff a lot more quickly with all these worms in here. Even all this leftover paper scraps. You could see shredded paper and cardboard floating around in here too. It seems like this bin just isn't quite as productive as it could be, despite the fact that it seems pretty busy and crowded. But whatever. Even though I'm finding leftovers, it's usually not enough to stop me from giving a bin its intended feeding. More banana peel. What is going on with this system? I think you would probably tend to agree that what we saw in the other bin was much fewer leftovers. I believe this might have also just been a little sliver of the busted up pumpkin stem. So, unusual. Even here, some leftovers. Last time we were finding leftovers of the grapes that they received 2 feedings ago, and we did sort of decide that the grapes were coming along pretty good on their own without any help. And I think that was the only grape that I actually spotted. I didn't even notice even one fragment of grape in the other system. And that would have received, grape as well. It seems like the moisture in here is pretty high too. Well, whatever. I think we've explored enough. It's time to drop in today's feeding and be done with it. So I always worry about reaching into my supply of bedding with little worms on my gloves. I wouldn't want to implant one particular type of worm into my bedding supply and then have those worms transplanted into another bin with a different species living in there. So here's some more of this nice bedding. Stuff's been sitting around, so it's getting a little bit gooey. I mean, the paper and cardboard doesn't get too gooey, but the leaves that I mix in with it seems to get a little bit gooey. Or I don't know, maybe it's just my imagination. And then similarly, here's a piece of paper towel, and here's the food that we came down here with for them. Similar to what the other bin got is another banana peel and some moldy bread. Some of this bread wasn't even moldy. Some of it was just dried out, sort of forgotten about. So I just threw it in the freezer with the rest of the bread, and at this point I've just depleted my whole little collection of different types of breads that were set aside over various occasions when it seemed like they were no longer fit for human consumption. So usually I was taking these, pumpkin stem bits and trying to keep them together so that we can sort of find them together at a later point in time. And I should be gentle so I don't end up breaking them up further. And then all these chunks of potato that just want to keep on growing. I've got a funny feeling we're going to come back to a little potato tent when we return to this bin next time to feed. But who knows? Maybe we disturb those growing chunks of potato just enough to stop their growth. I don't know. We shall see. All right. I think we've done a pretty good job here, replenishing their feeding zone, giving them some nice fresh bedding. Oh yeah. Let's not forget the grit. And did I put worm chow into the other system? I think I did. So let's be fair. Let's make sure both systems get a little helping of it. And it almost seems like we should go a little bit skimpier on feeding this system. Seems a little counterintuitive because it does almost seem like we've got a larger population living in here that would require a larger quantity of food. But for whatever reason, I just keep finding leftovers in here. Well, whatever. Who knows? Maybe I just need to expand the interval a little bit. You know, it's cooling down. It's winter time. Even though we've had some unseasonably warm temperature over the past few days, I am anticipating some cooler weather rolling in soon as the winter weather starts to set in a little bit more. And since these are African nightcrawlers, a tropical species of worm, I generally do anticipate that my African nightcrawler systems are going to start to slow down a little bit when the temperatures drop down here in my wormery. Because, I mean, it doesn't get terribly cold down here, but since it's not heated, it does cool down a little bit. And I do always anticipate that my African nightcrawlers, my Indian blue worms, those types of worms that usually operate best at warmer temperatures, I usually do expect that they're going to kind of start composting a little bit more slowly for me. And that's fine, as long as the cool doesn't, you know, affect them any worse than that. If they just slow down a little bit in their composting capability, that's fine. As long as the drop of temperature doesn't do them in, I'm okay. So maybe it is probably a good idea to extend the period of time in between these check-ins with these tropical worms, so that they can get caught up on the foods that they've been given and the feedings that they've been given, instead of just coming back in here and cramming more food at them that they don't need. Maybe instead of 10 days, maybe we should wait a couple weeks before we check in here next time. I don't know. We'll see. I will be curious to see how the potato is going to grow or not grow in here. I don't know. I got a funny feeling we're going to see more growth coming out of here next time. So just make sure we don't have any worms stuck to our glove, and then we can start covering up here. Yeah, good bit of moisture. Usually the amount of material sticking to my glove is the clearest telltale for me about the moisture content of my systems. If I see a lot of stuff sticking to my glove, it usually tells me that the system's probably got a little bit more moisture in it than it needs to have, but that's okay. The worms like it that way, so let them enjoy it. Okay, I just kind of tilled around there again, so I wanted to make sure I didn't pick up any other wormies on my glove, but I think we're done here. Oh, we also have a replacement top covering paper, so we've got a pretty consistent setup in both bins. I mean, you might have noticed it's not an optical illusion. This bin is a little bit narrower than the other bin that we fed, so you might have noticed me kind of struggling to get these two edges to reach the walls, because these bags are the same size bag, but this bag has a much easier time covering the entire surface in this bin, because this bin's a little bit narrower than the other bin. But other than that, they're being managed as pretty much identical systems. All right, I got a few things I got to take care of getting cleaned up and put away, but I'm not going to keep you around for that. That's boring. Before I go there really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always very much appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.